Right, so the APSA Early Career Essay Prize is aimed at spotlighting the works of young scholars from and in Asia, so to give it a bit more of a diverse audience. The winner will also be invited, as you see here, to participate in the current and the future APSA Essay Prize plenary session comprising a 1-hour talk, inclusive of Q&A. Yeah, so we had a bunch of good submissions, and we are very happy to announce that the winner of the essay prize is, I don't know, drum roll. Yuang Chen from US for his essay, An Interacting Problem for Governing Law. Yeah. I learned from the PSA that we start giving these things out now, so we're going to give one out for Yuang as well. So we're going to go to the... Oh, this is... and while he gets ready, I'll just briefly introduce Yuang. He's a first-year PhD student at NUS, National University of Singapore. He finished his BA at Renmin University of China and his MPhil at Chinese University of Hong Kong. So he works in the philosophy of science and metaphysics, and currently working on fundamentality, explanation, laws of nature, and dispositions. So we thought a lot about who to give like this keynote session right from Asia. And we thought the best thing to do was just to highlight our early career scholars and give them a chance to share their work. So without further ado, Yuang, please proceed.
Thank you so much, Eugene, and all of you being here. And it's my great honor to have this prize from this first conference of APSA. Yeah, and I'm just going to talk about my recent research on metaphysics of science, which is in particular against the governing conception of laws, as you can see in the title. So this project, I may call it starting with the metaphysical dissatisfaction with some series of laws. And part of me finds this weird because I'm standing from a metaphysical perspective to criticize some series of laws, and many of people working on it, they just don't really care about metaphysics. They care about how to characterize the data correctly and appropriately. But another part of me, maybe the metaphysical part, just find it so crucial and fatal, and I think, so I didn't figure it out. I should put it forward and ask you guys to help me. And yeah, first an introduction. So the governing view of law says that the laws, together with the initial conditions, make it the case that the physical goings on in the world behave as they do. So this making the case is what they dub as governing. It's the metaphysical relation of governing. And for a simple example, we consider two electrons repelling one another. We can ask, why is that? A natural answer is that they are governed by Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law, together with the fact that they have a negative charge, makes it the case that the force between them is repulsive, because both of Q1 and Q2 are negative, so the force is repulsive. That's the making it the case. And proponents of the governing law take talk of governance as face value. So they're not satisfied with saying that it's a metaphor, it's a useful way to talk about the relationship between laws and the goings on to govern. They posit that there are really such orderly dependence relations holding between the laws and their instance, and making the case that the latter depend on the former. And opponents, including both the Humean and the dispositionalists, they say that by contrast, the Humean denied that the laws govern their instance in any substantive case. So talk of governing for them is just loose speech. So they agree that the goings on behave as they do accord with what the laws are. But that does not mean anything seriously. It does not mean that there is some real dependence relationship between them. And for this talk, I argue that the governing view has two features, and each of which is independently plausible, but they are problematic when taken together. First, the thesis I call dualism. Laws are dualistically distinct from the physical goings on they govern. I will explain the term later. And interactionism. Laws make goings on behave as they do. So these features motivate the view and distinguish it from two prominent rivals. the humanism and dispensationalism. But taken together, they introduce a very fatal problem, which I call the interaction problem. This problem is rather metaphysical, but I believe it has some crucial output. So the structure of this talk is this. I will first introduce the two features. Then I will introduce a surprising analogy between the governing view and substance dualism in the literature of philosophy of mind. And after that, I transpose the problem for the governing view, and then the objection and response. Yeah. Oh, by the way, a side note is that I'm not going to cover a particular version of the governing view, which is the Armstrongian DTA view, according to which there are necessitation relations holding between the universals. I'm mainly talking about the so-called more contemporary governing view, where they hold that laws are primitive. They govern the goings-on, either in the form of constraint or in the form of production. So the governing view, according to me, is dualistic. By this I mean two things. There are two substances. So what the laws are does not depend on how the goings-on behave. And the second claim I call cross-category. So governing law belong to a distinct ontological category from that of the goings-on they govern. And you can see neither criterion is sufficient nor necessary for the other. But the governing view surprisingly satisfies both. So for example, there are some cases where independence holds, but cross-category does not hold. You just consider a particular chair here and a particular mountain maybe on Mars. They belong to the same category. They are all physical stuff, but they do not in any interesting sense metaphysically depend on each other. And there are some other cases where the two kind of things are cross-category, but they are not independent. For example, consider the enterprise of truth-making, where they say the truth of a proposition depend on facts. This is a case where cross-category is satisfied, but independence is not. However, our governing view satisfies both, and that leads to the problem. So let's consider independence first. So the kind of dependence I state here, to clarify, is metaphysical dependence. So this distinguishes governing view from the other two rivalries. So humanism says that laws merely summarize the goings-on and laws supervene on the human mosaic, and not vice versa. And dispensationalism says that laws are derived from the essential dispositional nature of the goings-on, which is part of the nature of the goings-on. So it is not something external to the goings-on itself. It is because of the nature of electrons that they repel each other. It's not that they are governed by a law. Or they are governed by a law, but the laws are derived from their nature. So the independence of governing view is taken as a motivation for governing view, because it can avoid the two worries that plague the two other views. So the humans face the worry that if laws are mere summaries, they are plausibly explained by their instance. However, they want laws to instead explain their instance. Thus introduce the problem of circularity. And if we take law as independence, the human worry is avoided for the governing theories. And the dispensationalists also face an unwanted consequence. Some people find it acceptable, Alexander Bird, for example, but most other people, they don't like it. The bad consequence is that if laws depend on essential dispositional properties of goings-on, they turn out to be metaphysically necessary. So given all those things in the world, and given all their dispositional nature, the laws cannot be different. So you cannot imagine a possible world of all the physical occurrences are like our world, but the laws are different. But that for many people is a possibility. By taking laws as independent, governing will also avoid this worry. It's simply because laws are independent, so the goings-on does not determine what laws they are. So our world can be governed by different sets of laws. So Tim Baldwin, which is maybe the biggest proponent of the governing view, claims that the independence of governing law is indispensable. So he says that the laws can operate to produce the rest of the mosaic exactly because their existence does not ontologically depend on the mosaic. Exactly because laws are independent, so we can develop our framework of the governing laws. So the second claim within the dualism claim, that is, the laws and the goings-on are of different ontological categories. So I will first introduce you to some textual evidence where some active governing theories, they themselves think laws belong to a distinct ontological category. Then I will introduce you to some independent reasons to agree with them. So there are actually mainly two choices for an ontology of governing laws. Some take it as propositions. Foucault argues explicitly that laws are propositions, and his view is intended to cover the governing law. And Tim modeling take it as three generous entities. So laws may instead be unanalyzable and is something of its own kind. So here are some citations, direct citations from Vogel and Grafable to discuss the possibility that laws are propositions. I will not read it. Yeah, and second stance, which is a bit more plausible, says that laws are sui generis entities. They're of their own kind. So Tim Moulton writes that I take the content of the laws to be expressed by the equations, like Newton's equations of motion and the statutes of lawhood to be primitive. And Jack writes that in the case of Mendelian primitivism, a fundamental law of temporal evolution conceived of as an entity of a sui generis kind. And Lowe writes that modeling holds that laws are sui generis entities. And either way, neither propositions, equations, nor the sui generis entities are the thing governed by the governing law. The thing governed by the governing laws are the physical goings-on. Or if you want to include biological goings-on, that's also fine. But they are just not propositions or sui generis entities. They are something we know of. We can study them by science. And thus, we have the textual evidence to support for the idea that laws is of a distinct ontological category from that of the goings-on. And here are some other independent reasons to think that they are of a distinct ontological category. First, laws are not themselves in any plausible sense physical. For example, one definition may be something is physical if and only it is studied by physics, and it's physical if and only composed of material objects, so on and so forth. And no matter which plausible definition of being physical we take, the laws of nature, the physical themselves, are not physical. And the second reason is that laws are not in space-time. This is a bit more controversial. I will come back to this later, but here is a simple reason. So if laws are in space-time, in principle, we should be able to specify which part of the space-time we can find the laws. And no matter which part of space-time we look for, we cannot find the law. And if we specify that the law as equals ma is here, it's arbitrary and implausible. So that's the second reason why we take laws are not in space-time. There is a potential possibility that laws are only omnipresent, that every law is everywhere. That's a simple claim, but we will come back to that later. That is, I think that's possible, but that will not save governing view from the interaction problem I'm going to propose. Yeah, and here is the dualistic distinctness. So governing laws and goings-on are metaphysically independent and belong to distinct ontological categories. That's my first feature of the governing laws. Yeah, this is the second feature, interactionism. I argue for two claims that are relevant for the argument to come. There are two subsets of this interactionism. The first is rather minimal, and I admit it's vague and ambiguous, but you can see that it's intelligible to claim that governing laws interact with goings-on in the sense that laws make it the case that the goings-on behave as they do. There is a substantial sense which distinguishes governing view from other views, that the laws make it the case that the goings-on behave as they do. For example, Tim Moulton says that he has this temporal evolution picture of the reality where it's an initial state together with the laws produce the subsequent state and goes on forever. Well, not forever, but anyway. So the second claim is more substantive, so I will motivate it more. So the interaction between laws and goings-on is to be distinguished from grounding. This is again some current papers, so I will say more about it. later. Let's first talk about making it a case. So the three different views have different pictures about why the goings-on behave as they do. So the humanism claims that it is root. So we have these patterns in our universe, but there's no further explanation of those patterns. And dispositionalism says that there are certain patterns in the world, and there are such patterns because of the dispositional nature of the either entities or process or any kind of fundamental stuff in the fundamental layer of reality. Their dispositional nature makes it the case that we have this pattern. And the governing view says that it is the governing law makes it the case that we have this pattern in our universe. Our universe conforms to the law that F equals ma because of the governance of the law of F equals ma. That's the basic idea. And one useful conception to distinguish the dispositionalism from governing view is that you think of the dispositionalist explanation of patterns as endogenous, in the sense that the things behave as they do because of the nature of themselves. And you think of the governing explanation as exogenous, in the sense that the things behave as they do because of something external to the things, in particular the laws. Yeah, and here are two prominent conceptions of governing. One is producing, so laws produce later states of goings-on from earlier states. And another is constraining, so laws constrain which total histories are nomologically possible. So you can see the history permitted by laws is a proper subset of the entire possible histories. Yeah, let's first talk about production. So modern writes, the laws of temporal evolution operate whether deterministically or stochastically from that initial stage to generate or produce later states. And so according to this, we can see it's very clear that he takes laws as making the case the goings-on to behave as they do. Thank you. And the constraint conception, though it may sound more modest and more and less metaphysical, it still needs the metaphysical oomph to separate it with other views. So, for example, Chen and Goldstein write, the primitive status of fundamental laws is the precondition for having a non-human account of scientific explanation. The constraint provides the needed oomph behind scientific explanations. Here lies the main difference between Minky, which is their own account, and human reductionism. So no matter we go for the constraint approach or we go for the producing approach, the governing theories have to accept the modest claim that laws make it the case that the goings-on behave as they do. And this is the minimal claim of the interactionism. Right, and here is a more interesting view that governance is not grounding. It has been argued in literature that there are several reasons to take governing not as grounding. Those many people disagree, but I will just put forward those reasons which I find highly plausible. So here are two main reasons. The first, grounding has relative fundamentality and no corresponding equation applies to governance. For example, if you say the particles arranged table-wise in the particular energy field grounds the existence of this table, you are claiming that this table is less fundamental than the particles. But in the case of governance, it doesn't make sense to say that the laws are more fundamental than the fundamental physical entities. So the electrons are governed by laws. They are not less fundamental than the laws. They are just so different. It cannot compare the fundamentality between them. And grounding plausibly necessitates the grounded. That's the second reason. In this picture, we don't have that the laws necessitate the goings-on in the government. For example, our universe has its unique set of laws. It is not the case that given this unique set of laws, our universe must be this universe. These laws can apply to another totally different universe. So that is another reason. Oh, this is the slide I'm trying to introduce that laws do not necessitate. So considering more generally, which states that all F's are G's, and the physical entity A such as FA. So plausibly, the laws govern the fact that GA, or if you wish, the sequence in which FA is followed by GA. But the law does not necessitate GA nor the same sequence, because simply the A can be a contingent thing. A can be, the law can exist without the existence of A. So in that sense, we take the stance that laws do not necessitate. Here is one more line of thought. I think I'm just going to skip it. Yeah, because those two already proposed reasons I think are more reasonable. So if you wish, we can go back to that. Let's take a stop. So what I have established so far is that the governing view has two characteristic features: dualism and interactionism, and each of which have two subclaims. So dualism claims that laws are independent of the going-song and vice versa, and the cross-category claims that laws and the going-song they govern are just of different ontological categories. And interactionism has two subclaims. One is that the laws make it the case that going-song behave as they do. The second is that governance is not grounding. And I know of tomorrow there will be a talk arguing that governing is grounding, so you can look forward to that. Yeah, so these two features lead to a problem. Let's introduce another dualistic view. This view also satisfies both dualism and interactionism, and you are all familiar with this view. That is the Cartesian substance dualism. So the idea is that there are mental substances as well as physical substances, and they belong to different ontological categories. So no mental entities depend on any physical entities and vice versa. So they are supposed to explain the systematic correlation between the mental and the physical because they already posited that they are different, but they still have to explain the correlation. They have three major options. Epiphenomenalism, they claim that physical affects the mental but not vice versa. And parallelism, they are just parallel. They are like a cloud set by the God. And interactionism, which is Descartes' own stance, and focus on the interactionism. So it offers a straightforward explanation of physical-mental accordance. So the systematic correlation between mental state and physical goings-on is explained by the genuine causal interaction across ontological categories. So they are positing a genuine cross-category interaction. And as we will see later, this is where the problem comes from. And one motivation for interactionism is that it does justice to the equation that the mental state can indeed sometimes affect our physical state. For example, the fact that I feel pain makes it the case that I engage in certain avoidance behaviors. So yeah, this is one motivation for interactionism, but yeah, don't take it too seriously. Here is the shared structure between our interactionist substance dualism and governing view. So we check all those squares. The interactionist dualism has this independence cross-category, making the case non-grounding-like. And for the non-grounding-like, I have to say more about that because to solve the systematic correlation, what the substance dualism need is not grounding, it's rather causation. And that is why it is not grounding. And so for all these four features, we have our governing view closely analogous to the interactionist dualism. Here is the ghost of the old problem we all know. So the problem is that, here's the problem. So it's first, most famously proposed by Princess Elizabeth. But the idea is so clear. So it's the nature of souls is so distinct from the nature of the material bodies. How could souls interact with body at all? So we can reframe this challenge to transpose it to our governing theory. Here is a case study. So if laws are so distinct, in particular dualistically distinct, to be specific, from the physical goings-on, how could laws interact with physical goings-on at all? This is just a case to These are the motivation for the challenge to come. We can sharpen the interaction problem. So if the analogy is to constitute a genuine objection to the governing view, we must first specify the interaction problem itself. So what exactly does the problem amount to in the original mind-body literature? We have to be careful about that. So there are at least two lines of thought. One is that it directly arises from the strangeness of the mental substance, and from the fact that the soul and body are just so different to interact each other. And second one are Stephen-King's pairing problem. I first introduced the first one. Oh, where's my slide for the first one? But the first one is pretty clear. I don't need a slide for that. So the idea is that the souls, being souls, they are just different from the physical bodies. Descartes has a hard time figuring out where the souls reside and how the soul operates on the body, and so on and so forth. But the basic starting point is that the entity he postulated, that is the soul, is just not the ordinary thing, or not the physical thing we see in our ordinary world. They're just so different from the bodies. So that is the source of the reason, or the source of the objection that it cannot affect the body. Okay, let's just directly go to King's pairing problem. I think I will take my time to read it. The King says there are two souls, A and B, and they perform an identical mental act at time t, as a result of which a change occurs in material substance M shortly after t. So we may suppose that mental actions of the kind involved generally cause physical changes of the sort that happen in M. And moreover, that in the present case it is soul A's action, not soul B's, that cause the change in M. So surely such a possibility must exist, but ask, what relation might serve to pair soul A's action with the change in M, a relation that is absent in the case of soul B's action and the change in M? That is, what could be the pairing relation in this case? Evidently, no spatial relations can be involved to answer this question, for souls are not in space and are not able to bear spatial relations to material things. Soul A cannot be any nearer to material object M or more perpetually oriented in relation to it than soul B is. Is there anything that it can do for souls with space or network of spatial relations does for material things? So the basic picture is that King motivates the need of spatial relation to explain particular souls being paired with particular body, and go on to argue that because souls are not in space, so such pairing cannot be explained, and such pairing being brute is a disadvantage for the substance dualism, and he thinks is a fatal one. Here is the structure of King's case. To form it in a contrastive case, we have the pairing problem is that there is nothing that metaphysically explains why a particular soul rather than another causally interact with the particular body that it does, rather than with some other body. So we can see it is claimed true that soul A caused the change in body MA and soul B caused the change in body MB. But one part is missing, that is why this is the case. Why soul is paired with the change in body MA and soul B is paired with the change in body MB. There are some very intuitive solutions to this, but it just can't stand closer scrutiny. For example, if you say that soul A explains the change in body MA because soul A resides in the body MA and soul B resides in the body MB. In that case, one way to respond is that you're already positing that souls are in space. So if you think souls are not in space, this is not a available response. And another problem is that even you claim that this soul A resides in this body, that soul B resides in that body, you have to give further explanation for that. Why this is the case, and moreover, where the soul A resides. And so there are a bunch of problems against those simple solutions to this problem. here is the breakdown of the original pairing argument. So the first claim is that the pairing requires metaphysical explanation. And be quick about this is that suppose C1 and C2 are two simultaneous firing of two guns, and E1 and E2 are the deaths of two persons. So why do the following pairing obtains rather than cross pairings? One way to put this is rather ironic way, it's a funny way, is that there is no principal way to pair the two firings with the two deaths. Then what kills what would be metaphysically brute. Yeah, so the legal system will not care about what is metaphysically brute, but this seems to be a problem. Here's the spatial relation. Tim suggested that to explain the pairing, the most plausible choice is we go for spatial relations. He motivates this by arguing in general that spatial relation is needed in pairing a cause with effect in the physical position. So generally there are two ways. Either a field in the causal mechanism connecting a particular firing to the corresponding death. So for example, the momentum and the orientation of the bullet. And secondly, we can also, if there are no such mechanism available, we can still manage to explain it. We just find what grounds this pairing. So for example, how the gun is positioned relative to the body, or how close it is to the victim. We appeal to some so-called lower level fact to explain this higher level gun firing. And one way to say that is, one way to, as an alternative way to explain the pairing without appealing to spatial relation is to postulate the so-called metaphysical glue. So we stipulate that each soul is essentially the soul of its body and interacts only with that body. I think the main problem for this is that this is simply not available for substance dualism. Substance dualists must claim they are different substances in the sense that they are just, first of all, independent of each other. You cannot say that the souls are in the essence of the body or the body are in the essence of the soul. That would be either classing into property dualism or not dualism at all. Yeah, and finally, Tim argues uncontroversially, souls are nowhere in space. So if you give up the traditional Cartesian conception that souls reside in a certain particular organ in our brain, it seems that we have no alternative to just stipulate where the souls are. So it's plausible, I think that's plausible that souls are not in space if you are substance dualism. Yeah, here's the main thing. Let's go back to our governing view. So the governing view faces a similar problem. So first to put it, we can ask contrastively, in virtue of what L1, law 1, rather than law 2, governs G1 going on 1 rather than going on 2. And we can also transpose the two ways to prove the problem. We can either appeal directly to the strangeness of the governing laws and the fact that the governing laws and what they govern are just so different, as they have proved that they are dualistically distinct. Or we can also explore how to transpose King's pairing problem to the governing view. I will just omit the first approach, and because the second approach can be more interesting, I don't have to just iterate the idea that laws are different. I can say more about it. So consider two examples. We have law 1, a field equation, law 2, second law of thermodynamics, and going on 1, the space-time dynamics and gravitational waveform of a binary black hole merger. Going on 2, a microscopic ideal gas freely expands into vacuum. Its entropy typically rises towards equilibrium. So they ask, in virtue of what? Is it that the Einstein field equation, rather than the second law, govern merger waveform rather than the increase in the entropy. So what explains such pairs? It may sound weird. If you are, yeah, it still sounds weird to me to ask this question. But as we have motivated a lot, it's a sensible question to ask because it just takes the same form the objection against the dualism case. You can just legitimately ask questions that why L1 rather than L2 governs G1 rather than G2, and if you think about it carefully, you'll find it's just hard to solve. So here is a picture of it. So why do the pairings obtain rather than the cross ones? Note that this equilibrium concerns those law-specific aspects. I'm not saying that the gas are not governed by the Field's equations. I'm saying that the increasing entropy is governed by laws of thermodynamics rather than the gravitational laws. So why is the case that gravitational laws govern the merger waveform and the second law governs the gas entropy increase? It seems to be a problem. So, but one may complain that our governing theories, they don't care about those particular token level governing planes. We are not trying to claim that a particular law governs a particular going sum. Instead, they are trying to put forward the view that a mesh of laws govern the entire reality. And that's a view by Eric Schumann. But I think she is the only one in the literature so far to explicitly endorse this view, and other governing theories just frequently talk about a particular law governs a particular going sum. So it's still a need. I still feel the need to deal with this problem. So it therefore seems that we should be interested in providing metaphysical explanation of such particular token level fact of governance. So we go for our first claim, the governance facts are not brute. Because one way out of trouble is simply to claim that I claim law 1 governs going sum 1, but I say no explanation of it. It's just brute. But this is not plain fair. So there should be reasons why the second law governs the fact concerning the increase in entropy, and gravitational laws govern the gravitational change. So treating particular facts of governance as unexplained introduce, firstly, a large number of brute facts into one's ontology. It's a problem that matters for many people. And there are innumerable physical going sums, and for each fundamental law, a vast array of facts to the effect that some particular going sum is governed by that law have to be postulated. It's at least an unwanted ontological picture of any scientific theory. And in fact, our governance can instead be explained by a small set of metaphysical posits that explain in a unified manner. The resulting ontology would be much better. So we will try to find if such a unified explanation is possible. So here is the first proposal. So they examine the nature of the laws. So the idea is that the gravitational law governs facts concerning gravitational change because they are gravitational laws. Period. They are gravitational. And to flex this out in a more general form, so the law that all x are g's governs the GA, what the sequence in which GA follows FA, but not IA, or the sequence in which IA follows HA, because law FG is about F and G. Law FG is not about H and I. But if you take it seriously, you have to examine what is it? What is this aboutness in play? Because you are demanding it to play an important role in your theory, so you must explain to me what you take to be this aboutness. So here is a funny analogy. If you consider the legal laws, which many manifestations of laws take to be metaphor and used to talk about views about the physical laws. So both the UK and Singapore have legal statutes that mentions driving on the left. the laws, whether they are actually stated in the same way, they can be stated in the same way. And yet the fact that you must drive on the left in Singapore is governed by the Singapore's policy, not the UK's policy. So both of the laws are about where you should drive, but there are some other factors in play that determines that the fact that you drive left in Singapore is governed by the laws in Singapore. So we change this to an idea about physical laws. So the mere fact that the proposed fundamental laws mentions the property does not itself explain why that law governs this token goings-on rather than another, or why it governs one class of goings-on rather than another. So if you consider Coulomb's law once again, and Newton's law of universal gravitation, both of them mention force and distance. So there are laws about force and about distance. But that alone does not tell us which law governs a given token of interaction. If you are asking me about a particular interaction of repulsive force between two electrons, I may point you to the Coulomb's law. If you are asking me about a more microscopic object, maybe I will point you to the laws of universal gravitation. So the aboutness here, if you take it very thin, it's not working. And moreover, more generally, so many different kinds of laws can be about the same quantities. So there are many conservation laws that are all about energies, or they are so-called mentioned energy in their formulations, but they just govern different goings on. So if that is not working, we turn to our second proposal. Instead of looking for the nature of the laws, we look for the nature of the governed. So for example, we say the merger waveform is governed by the Einstein's equation in virtue of the former being a gravitational phenomenon rather than a thermodynamic one. So GA rather than IA is governed by the law that all F's are G's rather than the law that all H are I, in virtue of the nature of G, or the nature of the sequence that G follows F. This proposal also asks us to have a rigorous account of aboutness. So what do you mean to say that some entity is gravitational? What do you mean that some entity is gravitational so that it's governed by the gravitational law? We need an account of that. And moreover, there is one more problem, that is the resulting explanation in this picture will be endogenous in the sense that it is more like a dispositional explanation. We are appealing to the nature of the governed thing to explain why it is governed by a particular law. So that would trace our explanation back ultimately to the nature of the goings-on, and that should be a not very good result for the governing series. And one more proposal is to say that our governance just is grounding. And you know, the grounding literature is fruitful. We can find some solutions from the grounding literature to solve this problem of explaining facts of governance. So if it is grounding-like, then maybe we can claim that, for example, like Karen Bennett, Louis de Rosset, they claim that the laws explains the fact that the law governs the goings-on. Or if you want to take a bottom-up, top-down picture, we can claim that the essence of the governed goings-on explains the fact that it is governed by particular laws. But my first response to this would be, I would say grounding is not grounding. There are many differences between them, and it is not sensible to take them as the same notion. Grounding is useful, but it's not that useful in our case here. And here are two field attempts. So to transpose the theory that grounding facts are explained by the goings-on have to be generated automatically, to use the metaphor by grounding theories, from the laws. This is not the case. Our goings-on, the electrons, the protons, and stuff, they are not generated from the fundamental laws. They are just physical goings-on. They are there. They are governed by goings-on, but you cannot say it's generated from the laws. It's weird. And to transpose the theory that grounding facts are explained by the essence of grounded, the governing will likewise collapse to dispositional essentialism, because you are appealing to the nature of the government to explain particular fact of governance, and that is bad for a governing theory. So finally, we are here with our one final remaining option, that is to appeal to spatial relations. This may sound weird at first, but after all those failed attempts, you can see this may be the final residual, but sadly it's still not available. So just like Kim argues that to explain the pairing between souls and bodies, the governing theories can appeal to spatial relation between laws and goings on to explain why the laws govern this goings on and another law govern another goings on. Yeah, and in some cases, explaining pairing will require the law to stand in some privileged spatial relations to the goings on in government. For example, if law 1 governs goings on 1, law 2 governs goings on 2, and they happen at the same time, it should be the case that law 1 must be in some sense nearer or oriented, or any way you put it. Some privileged spatial relations related to the goings on in government. Yeah, but as we all know, governing laws are not in space. Nowhere you can find the law that F equals ma. It's not here, it's not there, or maybe you say it's omnipresent. You say the law F equals ma is everywhere, but that will not solve the problem because you need to stand in certain privileged spatial relations to the goings on in government. Yeah, and that is the argument. And here is the conclusion, right on time. Big picture dialectic is that the interaction problem does not amount to a knockdown reduction to the governing view. I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying it's a big problem, which I myself have not figured out yet. But it shifts dialectical burden because the governing laws are worth their ontological price only if the view can offer a plausible account of how the law governs the goings on. But what I have just shown is that they have not completed the account yet. They have not provided a satisfactory explanation for why the particular law governs particular goings on. With that said, the governing theories should say more to rescue their view. And that's all about it. Thank you.